All right, let's dive into some serious science today. Stem cells, cloning, even bringing back extinct species.
Sounds like an ambitious deep dive.
You gave us a bunch of cool stuff to work with, lecture notes, background on a stem cell expert, and even some news on de-extinction.
Yeah, should be a fascinating discussion.
Definitely. So,
And
ready to explore the cutting edge of biology.
absolutely. I'm excited to see where this takes us. What I find most fascinating is how these topics all come together. Like they're all centered around this concept of what cells can actually do.
Cellular potential, right.
Exactly.
And our lecture notes jump right into that.
Okay.
Cell potency. They start with this idea of a cell that can become any other cell in the body.
Oh, wow.
It's like, imagine a single cell having the instructions to build an entire you.
That's totipotency.
Yeah, to potency.
It's amazing to think about.
Yeah,
And that totipotency is really only found in those very first cells after, fertilization.
makes sense.
As development progresses, cells start to specialize, so their potential narrows. Pluripotent cells, for example, they can become many cell types.
Many, but not all.
Not all, exactly. It's like they've chosen a specific path.
Like a skill tree, but for cells.
Exactly.
So stem cells are like those early stage cells, holding on to a lot of that potential.
Yeah,
They can differentiate into a variety of other cell types.
precisely.
Um,
And scientists have these really interesting ways to test for this pluripotency. And that's where stem cells, with their amazing ability to self-renew, come back into the picture. They have this special, and they're pretty excited about this.
I bet. Understanding how it works could lead to therapies that slow down aging or even treat age-related diseases. That's pretty amazing. Now, something I wasn't expecting to see in the materials. Sperm and mitochondria.
Oh, interesting combination.
Yeah. So I know mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, but how do they relate to sperm?
Well, sperm need a lot of energy to, do their job.
Yeah, of course.
And just like other cells, sperm rely on mitochondria for that energy.
So sperm do have mitochondria? I always thought they were super streamlined.
They are efficient, but they still need that energy boost from mitochondria. But here's the twist. Sperm mitochondria are actually destroyed after fertilization.
Destroyed. Why?
Well, there are a few theories about why that happens. One idea is that it's a way to prevent mixing of paternal and maternal mitochondrial DNA.
I see.
It ensures that only the mother's mitochondria get passed down to the offspring.
So all my mitochondrial DNA comes from my mother.
Exactly. And this is why mitochondrial DNA is so valuable for tracing ancestry in maternal lineages.
It's like this hidden genetic history passed down through the generations. Speaking of genetic inheritance, our bio on Professor Austin had some interesting stuff about Dolly the sheep,
Molly!
the world's first cloned mammal.
A groundbreaking achievement, no doubt. She was cloned using a technique called somatic cell nuclear transfer.
Okay.
Basically, scientists took the nucleus from an adult sheep cell and put it into an egg cell that had its own nucleus removed.
Like a cellular switcheroo.
Exactly. That egg cell, now with its new nucleus, developed into Dolly.
Incredible. But Professor Austin makes an interesting point. He says Dolly wasn't a true clone.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets a bit nuanced.
I thought cloning was all about making an identical copy.
Well, it is when you're talking about the nuclear DNA.
Yeah.
However, remember those mitochondria we talked about?
Yeah.
They have their own separate DNA,
Right.
and that DNA comes exclusively from the egg donor.
Okay.
So Dolly's nuclear DNA was identical to the sheep that donated the nucleus, but her mitochondrial DNA was different.
It's like having the same blueprint for a house, but using slightly different materials for the foundation.
A great analogy. Professor Austin's perspective challenges the traditional definition of what a clone is. It's not just about the nuclear DNA, it's about understanding the role of all the parts of the cell, like those mitochondria.
That's a really good point. It makes you wonder what truly defines a clone. Now, the materials also mentioned the Yamanaka factors. What's so special about them?
The discovery of the Yamanaka factors was a game changer. Dr. Shinya Yamanaka found that by putting a specific set of 4 transcription factors into adult cells, he could basically rewind them back to a state similar to embryonic stem cells.
So you're saying scientists can take an adult cell, like a skin cell, and make it act like an embryonic stem cell.
Exactly. It's like turning back the clock on cellular development.
That's incredible. The potential for medicine is huge.
Absolutely. Imagine being able to create stem cells from a patient's own cells. No need for embryonic stem cells.
Right.
No ethical concerns.
That opens up so many possibilities. But how did Dr. Yamanaka discover these factors?
A lot of hard work and a bit of luck.
The classic scientific combo.
Right. He used a technique called retroviral transduction to introduce different gene combinations into those adult cells.
So it was like trial and error, trying to find the right combination.
Exactly. It was like searching for a key that could unlock that pluripotency. And he found it.
That's awesome. And he won a Nobel Prize in record time for that, right?
Yes. Just 6 years after his initial publication. That's incredibly fast in the world of science.
Definitely shows how impactful his work was. Now let's talk about epigenetics.
Yep.
I always like that analogy of DNA being like a cookbook and epigenetics being all the notes scribbled in the margins,
A classic.
influencing how those recipes, the genes, are actually used.
Exactly. Epigenetics is all about gene expression. It's not about changing the DNA sequence itself, affecting how easily the cell can access and read the genes.
So it's all about accessibility then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can the cell easily find and read that recipe, or is it hidden away?
Cool. And what's even more fascinating is that what we do, like our lifestyle choices, can actually influence our epigenome.
That's right.
So what I eat, how much I exercise, even my stress levels, it all has an impact.
Absolutely. Our epigenomes are constantly responding to the world around us.
So a healthy diet isn't just good for my body, it's good for my genes too. This is wild.
It really is. It's this amazing interplay of nature and nurture. And it brings us to a really cool example. Identical twins.
Identical twins, okay.
They have the same DNA, right?
Yeah.
So you'd think their epigenomes would be identical too.
Yeah, I would.
But they can actually become different over time
Yeah.
because of differences in their experiences and environments.
So even though they have the same genetic blueprint, their genes might be expressed differently.
Exactly. This helps explain why identical twins, despite sharing the same genes, might develop different health conditions or personalities over their lives.
So one twin might develop a certain disease while the other stays healthy. That's incredible. It really shows the power of our environment. Now, let's shift gears to a topic that I think really captures the imagination.
Okay.
De-extinction. The idea of bringing back extinct species like the woolly mammoth, it sounds like science fiction.
It does. The first thing to address is that Jurassic Park scenario. Bringing back dinosaurs. Not going to happen. Dinosaur DNA is way too degraded.
So no T-Rex in my backyard anytime soon?
Not likely. However, the woolly mammoth is a different story. We actually have well-preserved mammoth DNA from specimens frozen in permafrost, and we have the Asian elephant.
Oh, right. A
The-
close living relative.
Exactly. Which could potentially be a surrogate.
That's amazing. So how would scientists actually bring back a mammoth?
It would take a combination of cutting-edge technologies. Think CRISPR-Cas9 for very precise gene editing, and then somatic cell nuclear transfer like we talked about with Dolly
Yeah.
to create a mammoth embryo.
So they'd edit the Asian elephant genome to include mammoth genes and then use cloning to bring that to life.
That's the idea.
It's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And of course, there are a lot of ethical considerations.
Absolutely. What are the implications for the surrogate species? How might a reintroduced species impact the environment? And should we be focusing on saving endangered species instead of bringing back extinct ones?
Those big questions. It's not just about the science, it's about the responsibility that comes with this kind of power. But before we get too deep into the ethics of de-extinction, let's switch gears and talk about a technology that could be just as revolutionary.
Okay.
In vitro gametogenesis, IVG.
IVG, very interesting.
We've been talking about bringing back extinct species, but now we're diving into creating life in a whole new way.
This should be fascinating.
So IVG, what exactly is it? Why is everyone making such a big deal about it?
Well, IVG is a technique that has the potential to, completely change how we think about reproduction.
Yeah.
It involves creating functional sperm and egg cells.
Wait, creating them?
Yeah, in a lab
In a lab, wow.
from other cell types in the body, like skin cells, for example.
Hold on, you're saying scientists can take, let's say, a skin sample
Uh-huh.
and create sperm and eggs from it.
Potentially, yes. It's still a very new field,
That sounds like something straight out of a movie.
doesn't it?
We're talking about the possibility of having kids with two biological fathers.
Whoa!
I know, right?
Good.
So basically, IVG is about creating eggs and sperm from stem cells all in a lab.
Yeah, it's pretty cutting-edge science.
It's like seriously cutting edge. It's like we're stepping into a whole new world of reproductive possibilities.
It really is.
And get this.
Yeah.
One of the sources you sent us, a paper called Biological Fatherhood and Infertility Mechanisms, talks about how scientists actually created mice with two biological fathers.
I know, it's mind-blowing stuff.
Right. When I first read that, I was like, wait, what? So I got to ask you, how did they actually pull that off?
Well, they started with stem cells taken from two male mice. Okay. And they, get this, reprogrammed one set of those cells to become egg cells.
Hold on, hold on.
Yeah.
Reprogramming male stem cells to become egg cells. How is that even possible?
It's amazing, right? They essentially took those male cells and transformed them into something called induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs for short.
iPSCs, yeah.
These iPSCs are kind of like those building blocks we used to play with as kids. They have the potential to become all sorts of different cells.
Oh, I see. Like stem cells have so much potential.
Exactly. And in this case, the scientists guided those iPSCs to become egg cells, which are also called oocytes.
Wow. So they have these oocytes that originally came from a male mouse.
That's right.
Wait, doesn't that create a bit of a problem? Like male cells have XY chromosomes, right?
Ah.
And female cells have XX.
Exactly.
So wouldn't that mess things up when you're trying to create an egg cell?
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. The chromosomes are key here. For an oocyte to develop like it should, it needs two X chromosomes.
So what did they do?
Well, they got a little creative. They manipulated the chromosomes. Sometimes they would delete the Y chromosome completely, and other times they would modify it.
Okay.
And then they would duplicate the X chromosome.
So they end up with XX.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They ended up with a viable XX oocyte.
Wow, that's some seriously impressive science.
It really is.
But I still gotta ask.
Yeah.
Why go through all that trouble? What's the big deal about creating mice with, like, two dads? What's the point?
Well, the experiment wasn't just about proving it could be done. It was about understanding how reproduction works on a really deep level and exploring how this IVG technology could help with infertility.
So it's not just about, say, same-sex couples having biological children, but it could help anyone struggling with infertility, right?
Exactly. Like, think about people who have gone through chemotherapy or have some genetic condition that makes it hard to have kids. IVG could give them a chance to have biological children that wouldn't have been possible before.
That's pretty amazing. It makes you realize how big the potential impact of this technology could be.
It does, doesn't it? But the implications are huge. And while it holds a lot of promise for treating infertility,
Right.
it also brings up some very complicated ethical questions,
Yeah.
especially when we think about the possibility of posthumous reproduction.
Posthumous reproduction, that's having children using genetic material from someone who's no longer living, right?
Exactly.
I can see how that would lead to a whole new set of ethical issues.
Absolutely. For example, the whole idea of consent.
Hmm.
Can someone truly consent to having children after they're gone?
It's a tough one.
And what about parental rights and responsibilities in these situations? Legal guardianship, inheritance, it's a whole new world.
Yeah, and there's the psychological well-being of the child to consider, too.
Of course, yes.
Growing up knowing that you were conceived using genetic material from a parent you never met.
That's a lot to process.
And then there are concerns about commodification. Does IVG open the door to, genetic material becoming something that can be bought and sold?
It's a valid concern. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line?
It's a lot to think about. Our source material actually mentions a story from Russia.
Oh, right. Yes.
A grandmother who used her deceased son's sperm to have a grandson.
A really powerful example of just how complex these issues can be. The grandmother was driven by love and her son's desire for a family. So she arranged for his preserved sperm to be used in a fertility clinic. With the help of an egg donor and a surrogate mother, her grandson was born.
Wow. It really shows how technology can sometimes get ahead of our ability to fully understand the consequences.
That's true. But how is that even legally possible? I thought there were strict laws about using genetic material posthumously.
You'd think so, right?
You would. But in many countries, the legal framework just hasn't caught up with these technologies yet. And in this case, the laws in Russia allowed it.
It's a reminder that all of this is happening within different cultures, different legal systems. It's not all black and white.
It's definitely a complex landscape.
Before we move on, let's take a moment to recap what we've covered so far. We started with stem cells, their potential. Then we talked about cloning, epigenetics,
Right.
now IVG. It's been quite a journey.
It has. From the basic building blocks of life to the mechanisms that control gene expression to the technologies that are really pushing the boundaries.
And through it all, these ethical dilemmas that make us really think about what it means to be human.
And what responsibilities we have as we gain more and more control over life itself.
Absolutely. These conversations are going to become even more important as science continues to advance. Now, let's go back to de-extinction for a bit and delve a little deeper into the ecological and animal welfare considerations.
Yeah, let's do that.
Bringing back something like the woolly mammoth is a really exciting idea,
It is.
but it's important to think about the potential impact on the environment and the well-being of the animals involved.
Definitely.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the science, but we can't ignore those potential risks.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the ecological concerns around de-extinction?
Well, introducing a species that's been extinct for a long time into an ecosystem, that's a very complex thing.
Right.
Unpredictable consequences. Imagine throwing a new ingredient into a recipe without really knowing how it'll react.
A recipe for disaster, maybe?
It's a possibility, for sure.
Yeah.
The reintroduced species might compete with existing species for food and resources,
Right.
disrupt food chains, maybe even introduce new diseases. And we have to remember that ecosystems are always evolving. The environment the woolly mammoth lived in thousands of years ago is not the same environment we have now.
That's a good point. It's not just about bringing back a species.
Right.
It's about whether it can actually survive in today's world.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier the welfare of the surrogate species that would be involved in de-extinction.
Yeah.
What are some of the concerns there?
In the case of the woolly mammoth, the Asian elephant would likely be the surrogate mother. And that raises some serious ethical questions.
Like what?
The pregnancy itself could be risky for the elephant,
Okay.
and there's no guarantee that the offspring would be healthy.
We're basically experimenting on one species to try and grow back another.
It's true. It's a tough ethical dilemma.
It really forces us to think. Is the potential benefit of de-extinction, whatever that benefit might be, worth the potential cost to other living beings?
And that's why aging seems to affect men and women so differently when it comes to fertility.
Right.
And, most people are aware that women have a biological clock.
Yeah.
But why is that so different for men?
Yeah,
We've got some really interesting research to help us unpack this,
for sure.
including a scientific paper all about oocyte decline and some insights from an expert in the field, Professor Austin, who is a stem cell biologist.
It's a great question, and the differences are really fascinating when you look at the biology.
So the paper we've got, biopart2.pdf, lays it out pretty clearly. Women are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have,
Right.
and that number just goes down over time.
Yeah, it's called natural attrition,
Attrition.
and it happens especially during ovulation.
Oh.
Each cycle, a certain number of those eggs are lost.
Oh, so like you can't replenish them or anything.
Exactly. So over time, the supply just dwindles.
So it's kind of like a bank account you can't make any more deposits into,
Uh-huh.
but you're constantly taking money out.
Perfect analogy.
And then on top of that, it's not just the number of eggs,
Right.
but also like the quality goes down too, right?
Yeah, as women age, the quality of the eggs declines as well.
Mhm.
And older eggs, they're more likely to have genetic abnormalities,
Oh, wow.
which can make it harder to conceive in the first place, and then also increase the risk of problems for any children.
So that's the biological reality behind that whole, biological clock thing.
That's what's going on behind the scenes.
Wow. Okay. So men, though,
Totally different story.
I remember in like high school biology,
Yeah,
learning that men can just constantly produce new sperm throughout their lives.
it's pretty incredible.
It always seemed a little unfair.
Yeah.
So what's the secret there?
It all comes down to these amazing cells called spermatogonial stem cells. Spermatogonial. They're like these little factories that just churn out new sperm all the time.
Wow. So there's no fixed supply. It just keeps renewing.
Exactly. That continuous renewal is what keeps men's sperm count relatively stable even as they get older.
It's amazing.
There is a nuance, though.
Huh?
Even though the quantity stays pretty consistent, the quality of the sperm can actually decline with age.
Mm-hmm.
Things like DNA fragmentation become more common in older men.
So like they're making new sperm, but those sperm might not be as good at their job.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Interesting.
It's like nature's way of balancing things out a bit.
Makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So are these differences like random, or is there an evolutionary reason why men and women's fertility age so differently?
Evolution definitely plays a big role here.
Okay.
Women invest so much more in pregnancy and child-rearing.
Yeah.
It's a huge energy expenditure from a biological perspective. So those evolutionary pressures likely shaped how fertility declines differently in men and women.
And biopart2.pdf actually said,
Yeah.
this difference in fertility decline reflects evolutionary pressures and reproductive strategies in mammals where maternal investment in offspring is typically higher.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
And it has real implications for how we approach fertility treatments and family planning.
So how does all this scientific understanding actually translate into helping people who might be struggling with fertility?
Well, for women, there are tests that can assess what's called their ovarian reserve,
Okay.
basically how many eggs they have left.
Hmm?
It helps them make informed decisions about family planning.
Okay.
And then for both men and women, there's some really promising research being done with stem cell-based therapies for
The
gametogenesis,
Gagneto.
which is the process of how reproductive cells are formed.
So this isn't just theoretical.
No,
It's like really impacting people's lives.
absolutely. And speaking of people making a real impact, that brings us to Professor Austin.
Oh, yeah.
She's a stem cell biologist who's doing some amazing work in this area.
So tell me more about her. Yeah, I read that she teaches at UCLA and CSU and sometimes even Caltech.
That's right.
That's impressive. And she has this stem cell journal club where her former students get together
Uh-huh.
to talk about the latest research.
It's a great way to keep the conversation going.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and you know what's really cool is her focus on critical thinking,
Hmm.
especially in this age of AI.
Right.
You know, she emphasizes that while AI can be a valuable tool, it's not a replacement for rigorous scientific thinking.
That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact has she had on her students?
We found this quote from one of her former students that I think really captures her influence.
Oh, wow.
The student said, "You have left a very positive impact in my life and have been one of my favorite professors at UCLA, so I hope you know how much you meant to all of us, and we miss you dearly."
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It sounds like she goes beyond just teaching the science.
Right.
Like she really inspires a love of learning.
Absolutely. She has a real gift for making this complex field feel relatable and engaging.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Mm.
We talked about how men and women experience these age-related changes in fertility differently
Yes.
and touched on some of the research happening.
It's a fascinating area of science, and it's always evolving.
It really is.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key takeaways our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that age affects fertility in both men and women, but the biological mechanisms behind those changes are totally different.
Right.
Women start with a fixed number of eggs, while men have a continuous supply of sperm thanks to those amazing stem cells.
Yeah.
And this basic difference has huge implications for how we think about family planning and reproductive health.
And it's really inspiring to hear about scientists like Professor Austin,
Mm.
but also making that knowledge accessible and engaging for everyone.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that science is a dynamic and evolving field, and there's always something new to learn and explore.
So where does this research go from here? What's next?
That's a great question. One area that I think is incredibly exciting is the potential of stem cell therapy to address age-related fertility decline.
Hmm.
You know, we talked about how men have those spermatogonial stem cells that keep making new sperm.
Right.
Researchers are exploring whether we can harness similar stem cell mechanisms to potentially extend or even revitalize egg production in women.
Wow, that would be amazing.
It's still early days in this research, but the possibilities are really exciting.
Yeah.
And of course, with any new scientific advancement, it's important to consider the ethical implications carefully.
Right. Of course, as we delve deeper into these scientific frontiers,
Mhm.
it's crucial to think about the broader societal impact
Absolutely.
and make sure these advancements are used responsibly.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Yeah.
You know, being able to evaluate new information, consider different perspectives, and engage in thoughtful discussions about the potential benefits and risks.
So how can our listeners learn more about this and stay informed about the latest developments?
There are some great resources available online and in libraries.
Okay.
You know, you can search for reputable websites and scientific journals that focus on fertility, stem cell research, reproductive health.
Uh-huh.
And don't be afraid to ask your doctor or other healthcare providers for more information. They can often point you in the right direction.
That's great advice. And it's never too early or too late to start thinking about,
Right.
your reproductive health and family planning goals.
Exactly. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to make decisions that are right for you.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We explored the science behind age and fertility, learned about some incredible research,
Absolutely.
and even got some practical tips for staying informed.
It's been a pleasure diving into this topic with you.
And with our listeners, of course. We hope you found this deep dive informative and engaging. I
Yeah.
feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, there's so much to cover.
There's so much more to learn about the science of age and fertility.
Absolutely. And one of the most exciting things is that it's constantly evolving.
Yeah. New discoveries all the time.
Exactly. Our understanding of these processes is getting deeper every day.
It makes you wonder, like, what's the future of fertility going to look like?
Right.
What kind of breakthroughs might be on the horizon based on what we've talked about?
Well, one area I think that's really promising is personalized medicine.
Okay.
As we get a better understanding of the genetic and environmental factors that play a role in fertility,
Uh-huh.
we'll be able to tailor treatments more specifically to people's individual needs.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all approach,
Exactly.
we're moving towards treatments that are, like, designed for each person.
Right. Imagine being able to identify the exact cause of infertility for a couple
Oh, wow.
and then developing a treatment plan just for them.
That's amazing.
That's the power of personalized medicine.
We talked about the potential of stem cell therapies
Oh,
to
yeah.
create new gametes.
Yeah.
Like, if that research keeps advancing, what kind of impact did that have on the future?
It could be huge. Imagine a world where people who are struggling with infertility because of age or medical conditions or even cancer treatments
Yeah.
could have the option to create new eggs or sperm from their own cells.
Wow.
It would give them a chance to have biological children that they might not have thought possible.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But like we've said, it's really important to be cautious
Of course.
and consider all the ethical implications.
Absolutely. Along with the scientific advancements, we need to be having these open conversations about the
Yes.
potential impact on society
Right.
and make sure these technologies are used ethically and that everyone has access to them.
For our listeners who are totally fascinated by this topic and want to learn more,
Yeah.
what resources would you recommend?
There are some fantastic organizations and websites dedicated to reproductive health.
Okay.
The American Society for Reproductive Medicine is a great one.
Okay.
And Resolve, the National Infertility Association.
Mm.
And then, of course, reputable scientific journals and medical publications are always a good bet.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come in this field,
Yeah,
and even more exciting to imagine what the future holds.
absolutely.
Power of AI, but also honing your own critical thinking skills. There was this quote, snakes and ladders game.
Snakes and ladders.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
did they mean by that?
Well, I guess what they meant was Professor Austin believes that, true learning isn't always this straightforward path to the top.
Oh, I see.
There are going to be setbacks,
Yeah.
unexpected turns.
Yeah.
Maybe you even run into a snake
Yeah.
that sends you sliding all the way back down.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. But she's saying,
Mm-hmm.
just like in the game,
Yeah.
those setbacks, they're really just opportunities to learn and adapt and find a new way forward.
I love that analogy.
Me too.
Speaks to her belief in a more holistic approach to learning and to life in general.
Go ahead.
Professor Austin sees connections between things that seem completely different. And she understands that creativity and resilience and being able to adapt, those things are just as important as scientific knowledge.
Especially in today's world.
Exactly. Things are changing so fast.
Right. It's almost like she's preparing them for more than just a career in science.
Yeah, she's equipping them with the tools and the mindset to face any challenge, whether it's a research problem or something in their personal life.
That's pretty cool. So,
Mm.
so what does all this mean for, the average person out there?
Well, I think we can all learn something from Professor Austin's approach.
Like what?
I think it's about embracing lifelong learning, being open to new things,
Yeah.
and realizing that setbacks are just part of the journey. It's about finding that balance between using AI and developing our own human ingenuity.
It really makes you think about your own life, doesn't it?
It does.
Like all those times you had to change course or start over, it's like those were your own snakes and ladders moments.
I like that.
It makes you wonder, how did those experiences shape you?
Exactly. So I'll leave you with this thought. What are the snakes and ladders in your own life? And how can you use them to learn and grow and reach new heights?
That's a great question. And who knows, maybe you'll have your next big breakthrough there. But that's all we have time for in this deep dive. Until next time, keep on exploring and make